Okay. We're live.
Well, good.
Yeah. So welcome everybody to our 5th labor forum today, which is our topic is union labor and building a renewable future. So thank you to everybody who is watching us and joining us on Facebook Live and to our esteemed set of panelists. We're really excited about this program today for an issue that I think is really pressing and is very timely right now. So usually, if you're a longtime viewer of this program, our other host, Gus Wood, is going to be joining us later. He is double booked in the Zoom world today, but he will be joining us later. But we have a wonderful person, co-host extraordinaire, filling in. Dr. Bob Bruno. I'm not just saying nice things about him because he's my boss, but this whole labor program idea was Bob's idea. This labor forum idea was Bob's idea, and that there are a lot of pressing issues facing working people, and that we need a space in order to talk about them and to really think through those ideas with folks from the academic and research world and labor leadership together to think about how we collectively can make the world more equitable and just for working people. And we're joined today by just a really fantastic group of panelists. First, we have Pat Devaney. I believe you might be our first Champaign guest. So he's from Champaign, and so I've known Pat for a while now, and just have really enjoyed seeing his career in labor just progress and build, and he's just become a really powerful voice for working people in Illinois. Pat has been a firefighter since 1995 here in Champaign, and he was the president of our local firefighters, Local 1260, and then he became president of the Associated Firefighters, AFFI, of Illinois in 2008, and then most recently in 2019, Pat was elected Secretary Treasurer of the AFL-CIO. So thank you, Pat, for being on. Second, we have Lara Skinner, who is the director of the Labor Leading on Climate Change Initiative at the Worker Institute at Cornell University. She studies labor and employment impacts on climate protection, clean energy, and just transition, and provides training and education programs for unions to help union leaders and members engage in the public debates and decision-making around climate protection and clean energy. Along with Dr. Mijin Cha, she authored the 2017 report, Reversing Inequality, Combating Climate Change, a Climate Jobs Program for New York State. And the Worker Institute also serves as the educational partner to Climate Jobs New York and the Climate Jobs National Resource Center, providing research, education, and training programs for unions in multiple U.S. states. She began her career in labor working with the Oregon's Farm Workers Union and the University of Oregon Labor Education and Research Center, which is a great space, and is an active member of the Graduate Teaching Fellows Federation, Local 3544. And I also got my start in labor in a grad local, and was the president of my grad local. So, and Lara's really going to help us bring a national perspective and a broad perspective to this conversation. And then finally, we have Sean Stott, who is the Director of Governmental Affairs with LIUNA, with the Labor's International Union of North America's Midwest region. Sean is the Director of Government Affairs for, this is a 50,000 member region of the labor. So I think a lot of times when we think about climate change, we think about the coast, right? But it's also very, very much an important Midwest issue. And among his duties, Stott represents the interests of the region's 17,000 Illinois members who reside predominantly in the state's 93 downstate counties. to the Illinois legislature. Prior to joining LIUNA in 2002, he worked for the Illinois AFL-CIO for 9 years, serving as its legislative director from 1996 to 2002. And he is a 1991 graduate of the University of New Hampshire, and he lives in Springfield with his wife and son. So I want to say that I think this is the most downstate Illinois presence we've had on the show. So we're really excited about that. So thank you for being on. And Bob, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Steph, and welcome to all of our guests, whether they're downstate, upstate, or out of state. You're certainly welcome. And we're pleased to host. As Stephanie noted, we've been doing these forums now for a few months on different topics. We've had wonderful guests from around the country and within the state and the labor movement, and it's always been an interesting conversation, and we do get people watching live and then afterwards when we post on a YouTube channel. So you're helping us do some good education. All right, so I do have the privilege of asking the first question, and I'm going to turn to Lara, who really is an exceptional scholar in this field and able to bring this national perspective. And she is lending her services to folks here in Illinois, which we'll certainly get around to talking to. So Larry, it's a big question. You got a lot of room to sort of run with it, but can you kind of explain to our audience, what is the conventional wisdom on the presence of global warming and its impact, and why there is such a need to smartly transition away from a reliance on fossil fuels to renewable energy? And I know that's a big topic, but you can kind of lay out that larger context for us, if you would.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Bob. And thanks to everyone. It's great to be here with you in this discussion this afternoon, and an honor to be on this panel with Sean and Pat. Yeah, that's a big question. Let me see if I can do this justice briefly. I would say that a good way to think about it is that there has been carbon dioxide in our atmosphere for a long time, but the levels of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere have remained relatively stable for hundreds of thousands of years, for a very long time. And when we started the Industrial Revolution and we started burning fossil fuels to power things, all sorts of things in our economy, to heat our homes, to run things in our homes, to fuel our transportation sector, to run our industries and manufacturing sectors, we started to see the amounts of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere exponentially grow. And that's been happening since about 1850, and it's becoming worse and worse, especially in recent decades. And basically, as we put more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, what you get is this sort of cloud of pollution and particles around our Earth that trap the sun's heat in there, and you start to see the Earth's average temperature increase. And the Earth's average temperature has increased about 2 degrees Fahrenheit in the last 100 years. And that doesn't seem like a lot, right? That doesn't seem like a big deal, 2 degrees Fahrenheit, but think about your own body. You're running 101 degree fever. You're not feeling so well, right? You're sick. And it's the same thing with the planet. Basically, this increase in carbon dioxide, which is largely from burning fossil fuels, has thrown the Earth's weather and whole climate system out of whack, causing all sorts of impacts, which we're now seeing on a daily basis around the planet. Think about larger, more intense fires on the West Coast, more frequent and intense hurricanes in the Atlantic Ocean, more frequent extreme weather events like high precipitation events. You've been seeing that in Illinois, rain events with over 6 inches of rain, more intense snow events, longer, more severe droughts during the dry season, and then longer, more frequent heat waves in the summertime. And what I would say is, a lot of people think about, refugees from war. We actually have more refugees from climate. They're called climate refugees than any other type of refugee around the planet now, just to sort of give you a sense of the scale and pace of the climate crisis. And then the other thing I would say is, you might think, oh, this is an environmental issue, climate change, it's an environmental issue. And I think, you can sort of think that at first glance, but when you dig into it deeper and you start to get into the details of it, you realize that it has significant labor, employment, social, and economic implications. And I think that's really at the heart of our discussion today. And think about how extreme heat waves affect workers who work outside. Will we be able to work outside in future decades when those heat waves roll through? Extreme storms cause billions of dollars in damage to our economy. They significantly affect public budgets, right? In the end, taxpayers end up bearing the cost of much of that. Many businesses are closed. We saw this after Hurricane Sandy, whether it's temporarily or permanently, you have workers who are out of work after these storms. It's also a public health crisis, right? You think kind of about climate change abstractly, but climate change is also pollution. And so there's significant effects on public health, right? Respiratory and other health issues. And then I would also say, you know, really what sparked our work in New York is after Hurricane Sandy, we saw that union members were really on the front lines of dealing with climate change and extreme weather events. Think about our most important infrastructure, where our roads are, where our transit infrastructure is, where our power plants are, where our water and wastewater treatment plants are. Airports, right? All of this stuff, our major urban areas are located along coastlines and waterways that are often affected by these extreme weather events and flooding. You know, so we had utility workers whose lives were put in danger trying to bring power back after these storms, transit workers who were trying to get buses and subways to safety in this flooding, nurses who had to carry patients by hand downstairs after the electricity went out and they couldn't use elevators. Our own local AFSCME DC 37 district was out of their building for 2 years because of the damage that was done to it after Hurricane Sandy. And then the last thing I would say is that, you know, it's important to keep in mind that working people, women, immigrants, the elderly, the most vulnerable in our society are hurt first and worst by climate change and extreme weather events. They have fewer resources to recover and adapt, you know, and we're seeing this in Texas, so we can talk about that more. So, you know, there's that part of it. The impact of climate change has a lot of social, labor, and employment impacts. The other part of it is when we talk about how do we address climate change, how do we reduce emissions, there are huge labor, employment, and economic implications on that side too. And on this part, I would say that 97% of the world's scientists agree that we have to get to net zero emissions by 2050, probably by 2045. That means that by 2050, we can't be producing hardly any carbon dioxide emissions anymore. We have had to transition our economy to a point where it's very low or zero carbon economy. We may be releasing some carbon dioxide still, right? There's certain things that we don't know how to decarbonize yet. We don't know how to decarbonize concrete making, steel making, some parts of the transportation sector. And so if we're there, right, we're gonna have to figure out how to capture that carbon dioxide and then store it in a way that it's not released into the atmosphere. But that's the big thing. We got to get to net zero by 2045, 2050. This is what scientists are telling us. And that this decade from 2020 to 2030 is probably the most important period for us to address climate change. We need to get our emissions to a place where they're no longer growing. They're currently still growing. They need to be leveling off, and then they need to be dramatically decreasing in this decade, which means that we're using all of the off-the-shelf technologies that we currently have to try to reduce emissions. And that means, you know, massively scaling up solar, wind, geothermal, heat pumps, all sorts of technologies that help us to reduce emissions, using low carbon and renewable energy power sources, expanding our electric vehicle fleet, massively improving and expanding public transit so people can get around without using cars if that's possible, weathering and doing energy efficiency retrofits to all of our buildings, old and new buildings, and then electrifying our buildings and producing the power needs for our buildings through renewable and low carbon sources. And I would just say, and we're going to really get into this, but that whole vision of how we, you know, what's happening with the climate crisis and how we tackle it and reduce emissions, of course, is a massive change. It's a massive transformation to our economy, and it has major opportunities for the labor movement, and it also presents major challenges for the labor movement, which I think we'll get into.
Lara, thank you so much. And you know, when you were talking, I really appreciated your thoughts about how that this is not just a climate issue, but it's also an issue for labor. It's also an issue that has, you know, profound social implications. Yesterday, I was on a forum and listening to another forum on racial justice, and they asked our local state rep, Representative Ammons, what was the biggest issue that she had worked on for racial justice. And if you know her, she's worked on a ton of racial justice issues in our community and for our state. And she really surprised me with her answer. She said, the biggest thing I've done for racial justice is to defend the Muhammad Aquifer, because if you don't have clean drinking water, we saw what happened in Flint, Michigan, and we understand what that impacts on your life. And the environment and environmental catastrophes always impact underrepresented populations, Black and brown populations worse and first. And fighting for environmental justice is fighting for racial justice. And we need to think about climate change. The ravages of climate change are going to impact working people, right? They're going to impact people of color. And that's such an important part of the conversation. So I'm really glad that you started us off with that framework, because I think it's really profoundly important. In terms of it being a labor issue, one of the things is it's a direct labor issue, maybe most immediately for people who work in the energy industry. Could you give us a little bit of a snapshot on the energy industry, and particularly in Illinois? Who are these workers?
Yeah, for sure. When we were doing background research on Illinois, and we did it with ILEPI, the Illinois Economic Policy Institute, what we found is that there are about 200,000 people who work in Illinois' energy sector. That's about 4% of your total workforce. And when I say 200,000 people working in the energy sector, I'm talking about energy efficiency, renewable energy, as well as folks who are working in any part of the coal, oil, gas, and nuclear industry, some oil and gas parts of the transportation industry. About 123,000 of those workers work in energy efficiency, renewable energy generation, advanced transportation technologies, advanced grid like battery storage and clean fuels. And then about 31,000 people work in electric power generation. So that's, generating electricity from fossil fuels, nuclear, as well as renewables. And I think, that's kind of the numbers and the quantitative side. I think what's equally important here is about the quality of the jobs. And we know that for many decades, unions worked hard to make sure that jobs in mining, in all parts of the fossil fuel industry, are safe jobs. Before the IBEW utility councils and parts of the utility work.
We seem to have, Lara seems to have frozen up there.
2 workers died on the job that made them good paying jobs with good benefits. And if you look nationally, power plant jobs in the fossil fuel sector are typically 10 to 14% unionized. Pretty good if you look at the sort of national averages. If you look at solar, 3% unionized. If you look at wind, it's 4% unionized, and energy efficiency, it's even lower. And jobs, and, Sean and Pat can talk about this more, but jobs related to the fossil fuel industry can easily pay $30,000 to $40,000 more per year than jobs in the renewable energy sector.
Okay, well, thank you. So that wonderful response to both the larger contextual question and then laying out what the labor market is here. And obviously there's room then for significant growth for organized labor to help turn these renewable jobs into really high quality middle class paying jobs. So Pat, let me turn to you. As now a statewide labor leader, what do you see as the labor movement's stake and its role in this transition to these renewable energy sources and renewable energy jobs that Lara is talking about? What's its investment and what should its role be in the future of this renewable energy field?
Yeah, thanks, Bob. And I want to start off too by thanking you and Stephanie for having us on today and talking about this issue. I'm really proud of the work that labor has done over the course of the last year, and it's great to be here with Lara. She's been just a tremendous resource for us, and Sean is as an equal partner and has done a tremendous amount of work in this area. So the labor movement, I think we have an incredible stake in working to meet the state's clean energy generation goals. And that's because, as Lara said, thousands of workers, these union members who make up the current energy generation workforce. We have members in every sector: nuclear facilities, coal-fired plants, natural gas generation, wind, and solar. And as we expand the number of renewable assets in our state by creating incentives like renewable energy credits that are paid for by Illinois utility ratepayers, we need to make sure this work is being done by the highly trained professionals that make up our workforce. You accomplish this by including labor standards such as prevailing wage, responsible bidder, and project labor agreements, all of which are woven throughout our proposals, our Climate Jobs Illinois legislative proposals that we're going to talk about a little bit later. The last renewable energy legislation that passed in Illinois back in 2016 was called the Future Energy Jobs Act, or commonly referred to as FEJA. Unfortunately, FEJA lacked any significant labor standards, and it created an environment in Illinois that was ripe for abuse. It has led to out-of-state renewable energy developers being awarded contracts for renewable energy credits, again, paid for by Illinois ratepayers. They in turn bring in out-of-state non-union contractors who bring in out-of-state workers, pay them a substandard wage, no benefits. And I know Sean can share some stories of his experiences and observations about the current labor practices of some of the renewable energy contractors across the state. So what's so exciting about this effort and this coalition we built is our role is to now lead on this issue. I think labor was fairly reactionary in dealing with FEJA. They let other groups bring legislation to the table and then, negotiated to a certain extent, although it was during the Rauner administration, so our voices were diminished when we got to the governor's office, and how to deal with other people's proposals. We're now taking the lead and introducing our own package of legislation to allow Illinois to meet its clean energy generation goals, our top priority, but with the Illinois worker at the forefront of those discussions. So that's what we've been doing really since last April. And we're at a point right now to be ready to introduce that package of legislation. And like I said, we're going to talk about it more specifically, I think, in a little bit.
Thanks. Sean, why don't we kick it over to you, and what do you see as some of the objectives and priorities of this climate labor coalition?
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Bob, as well for including me in this forum. It's a great opportunity, and we're pleased to be able to participate. As Pat said a moment ago, the primary objective that labor would have in establishing and rewriting Illinois' energy policy would be incorporating labor protections into our standards. Again, Pat mentioned the fact that our renewable energy system is predicated on financing essentially by ratepayers, yourself, myself, and everybody listening to this in the state of Illinois. We're all paying a couple dollars a month on our electric bills to finance renewable energy projects. And if you look at the experience Illinois has had with both wind and solar, the differences are stark. Illinois laborers and iron workers, operating engineers, and other trades have built every single one of Illinois' 3,300 wind turbines that have been constructed to this point. Now, contrast that with our experience in the solar industry, and it is a significant and startling difference. When you look at the larger scale community solar projects, which may be 15 to 20 acres in size, and they take 3 or 4 weeks to build, and also the mammoth utility scale projects, which could encompass hundreds of acres and take a year or a year and a half to build. The workers on these solar projects, predominantly, as Pat mentioned, are not from Illinois at this point in time. The cars and trucks in Illinois, corn and bean fields, as we speak, are covered with cars that or have license plates from California to Colorado, Oregon to Ohio, and Virginia to Vermont. And when contractors do offer jobs to local Illinois workers, they typically do so through temporary agencies which advertise wages as low as $12 an hour. So what we are trying to do with this coalition is to create good paying jobs that Illinois workers and Illinois ratepayers themselves can hopefully create a career in the construction industry, and when they do so, pay a decent wage and hopefully some benefits. So that's why Climate Jobs Illinois is seeking, among other goals, to establish meaningful labor protections to give those Illinois workers a chance to make a decent wage on these projects.
I'm sorry, Steph, you may be.
Oh, no. I just really quickly wanted to kick in because I wanted to mention that one of our commenters on Facebook just said any renewable energy development work should apply prevailing wage, commitment to remain neutral on organizing campaigns, PLAs, and community benefit agreements. So just the exact kind of thing that you're talking about, that we want these to be decent jobs, right? That this new energy jobs really need to be decent jobs. So I'm sorry, I just also wanted to mention, if folks watching on Facebook have questions or comments, please type them in and we'll get to them at the end of the program, to as many of them as we can. We've already got questions coming in. So Bob, back to you.
Yeah, I will just note though that the comment that you got just demonstrates the high intellectual level of our listening audience, right? I mean, this is what you're up against, folks, okay? Just be prepared for this kind of insight. But you know what? It occurs to me now's a good time, and Sean and Pat either can take this. Maybe you should describe who's in the coalition. Can you talk a little bit about the coalition partners and the component parts of it, so people have a sense of what we're referencing here? And Pat, why don't you go first,
Yeah.
and then Sean, you can piggyback.
Yeah, I'm happy to, Bob. So the Climate Jobs Illinois Coalition is comprised exclusively of labor affiliates. And we exist, as Sean described, and Lara described the problem perfectly. In our transition to clean energy in Illinois, we're going to do it. We support it. We're going to do it in a way that advances the cause of workers in the energy sector, both new and old. We work in partnership with the Climate Jobs National Resource Center. I believe Lara serves on their board, and also have research partnerships with the Cornell Worker Institute, U of I Labor Education Program. Dr. Bruno has done a tremendous amount of work in the area of research, and also with Alepi, who the U of I has partnered with, and just doing tremendous work for us. We now have 12 members of our executive committee from our participating affiliates, those affiliates who have made significant investments in this coalition and have made the commitment to tackling this issue with us. And I just want to tick down them because I think the diversity of our representation of our executive committee is definitely a strength of our coalition. We certainly have a good representation from the building trades. We have the Laborers Midwest region and our friend Sean, Liuna Great Lakes region, the IBEW State Council, IBEW Local 134, our Chicago local, Chicago Regional Council of Carpenters, Heat and Frost Insulators International, Operating Engineers 150, the Iron Workers, Chicago and St. Louis regions, the United Auto Workers, and then we have the Illinois Federation of Teachers, the Illinois Education Association, and the SEIU State Council. So all of these different groups come to the table, and it's been amazing how well we have worked together, but with different perspectives on climate change and the steps that perhaps we need to do to tackle it. But like I said, over the course of the last almost year now, we've made significant progress in this coalition. And the other thing I just wanted to mention, because we do have a strong partnership with the Chicago Federation of Labor and the Chicago and Cook County Building Trades, our 501c3 and 501c4 board are made up of representatives from each of those. We have Ralph Affronti from the trades, Bob Ryder from the CFL, Tim Dre, the president of the Illinois AFL-CIO, and myself sit on the business side of the board. But all of those policy decisions are driven by our participating affiliates.
Thanks. That's amazing. That's a pretty powerful coalition that you've built. And I think it also just speaks to, I think often we're told that there's some sort of dichotomy or a divide between labor and people who care about the climate. And I think that the work that you're doing really shows that workers understand that these issues matter, that they matter to our families, They matter to this generation. They matter to the next generation, and working people have long understood that. Sean, I want to go back to you, and I want to ask you your perspective. How is this effort? How is this current effort, this climate labor initiative, different from past labor efforts to align unions with the goals of protecting the environment? Things like the Blue-Green Alliance of the last decade, because this isn't the first time. I mean, this is not new, right? Labor has always cared about the environment. As an historian, that's something, it drives me crazy when people act like that's not true, because it is true. But how do you see this moment as different, Sean?
Well, I would say that the Climate Jobs Illinois Coalition is more formalized, structured, and focused than past efforts. Many unions have engaged in legislation dealing with the environment and clean energy over the years, including ourselves at the Laborers Union. But oftentimes, and I think Pat mentioned this, that engagement was more in reaction to a proposal that was put forward by another organization. I mentioned the Laborers Union. What we've done over the years, we were supporters of the wind industry's efforts to create a sales tax incentive, which really helped blossom the growth of the wind industry in Illinois back in 2009. We weighed in and supported legislation that would create certainty in the property tax assessments that wind developers would have to pay on the turbines that they build. We work with other unions like the operating engineers to clarify what the zoning jurisdictions for wind farms are in the state of Illinois. They're not always welcomed with open arms. In fact, there are two townships just south of Champaign County and Douglas County that tried to establish, asserted that they had jurisdiction over
Other folks hearing? Sean?
Yep, I did know. I think Sean, you frozen.
Oh,
Oh, here he's back.
am I back?
You're back. You're
You are
back. So
back.
you
Go
were
ahead.
just talking about Douglas County.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, and so this couple of townships in that particular county sought to assert jurisdictional oversight over wind turbines, and frankly, they wanted to stop this particular project. So, we engage with the developers and some other unions to clarify that those decisions are made at the county level. So the examples of things that we have done, and there are other examples of what other unions have done to forward the development of renewable energy and clean energy in the state of Illinois. But again, they've typically been in response to proposals that other organizations have put on the table. Climate Jobs Illinois, actively developing our own legislation, comprehensive legislation to address Illinois' energy needs. Stephanie, you mentioned the Blue-Green Alliance as a sort of a precursor to CJI. As the name may indicate, it's a coalition with two primary groups: unions, the blue, as in blue collar, and environmental groups, the green, like the Sierra Club. The Blue-Green Alliance is a national organization that has an agenda that goes far beyond the questions of Illinois' energy needs. Important as they may be, they are wide-ranging. They've staked out positions that range from removing lead from our water systems to international trade policy. Climate Jobs Illinois, as Pat mentioned, it's exclusively union membership whose focus is limited to Illinois policy and doing what we can to not only foster the development of clean energy, assisting those workers who are transitioning out of other industries as a result of a reduction in coal energy, as well as the renewable sector, as I mentioned. So that's what CJI is about, and that's we're excited about it.
Very good. Good. Thank you, Sean. Let's bring Lara back into the conversation. And Lara, I'm going to give you kind of two pieces to address. One, you noted the labor climate initiative in New York, and here we are in Illinois. And I believe there are efforts to expand this. It's more widespread other states. Can you talk about how Illinois fits into a larger national movement to bring labor to the forefront of climate legislation, climate policy, climate initiatives?
Absolutely, yeah. So I mentioned the work that we did in New York. My institute, the Worker Institute at Cornell, we convened a number of New York State unions, over 20 unions after Hurricane Sandy and Irene hit the state and really did a lot of damage, hurt working families, killed a couple of union members. Actually, it was a very significant event for us that we're actually still recovering from. And at that time, we basically realized what Pat and Sean have mentioned, which is that, we needed to move from being reactionary, like reactive in the sense of responding to proposals that were coming from the environmental movement and policymakers, and actually develop our own proactive agenda that was a pro-worker, pro-union agenda for how to deal with climate change. And it was very jobs-led, very equity-focused approach to tackling climate change. And it was a multi-year process. At the end of the process, it was a multi-dimensional research, education, and training process. And at the end of that process, the unions that were involved decided that they wanted to form an organization to actually try to implement the recommendations that we had come up with, called Climate Jobs New York. And they continued to engage and campaign around a number of key climate and energy issues. And we're really focused on how do we maximize union job creation and maximize, high quality economic development in the state. And early in the formation of Climate Jobs New York, that union-led climate jobs organization, they had a big victory around offshore wind. They realized that New York could secure a big part of its renewable energy and meet its clean energy targets through offshore wind. Cornell arranged a trip to Denmark, an educational exchange, that we could go there, learn about the world's largest offshore wind industry, meet with all of the unions in the industry, really understand the ins and outs of offshore wind. And we came back and we realized that New York State could procure about half of its power from offshore wind, and then started to move a campaign to commit the state to building that offshore wind. We were able to do that. Climate Jobs New York secured 9 gigawatts of offshore wind being built by 2035 was what they were able to secure with a project labor agreement on all of the construction work. And it's about $50 billion worth of work. And so it was our first sort of experience of, if we get in this early and sort of realize, okay, what needs to happen in this clean energy space? How can we lead on it in a way that's really jobs and investment focused, and make sure all of the job training and quality standards are built into it that are going to ensure that these are high quality family and community sustaining jobs. This is the right way to move this forward. And so coming out of that work that we did in New York and that sort of model, it was a union only process. It centered around building trades and energy unions, that have the most at stake in terms of jobs in this energy transition. And again, a very jobs and investment focused agenda. We realized that there was a lot of interest and a need to provide support and resources to unions in other states to do something similar, to develop a proactive, pro-union, equity-focused climate jobs agenda. And so Vinny Alvarez, John Podesta, Mike Fishman, and myself set up the Climate Jobs National Resource Center, which Pat mentioned earlier. And Cornell, as you all mentioned, is the academic partner to the Resource Center, and we're now working in about 10 states. And, as we mentioned, briefly in other parts of our discussion, we provide research, education, and campaigning support, the National Resource Center does, to state coalitions. But the state coalitions determine their direction, their structure, their priorities, but we provide them with some background support to figure out what would a sort of proactive climate jobs agenda look like in the state. And I can talk more about sort of the research that we do to help support that. But I would just say that, them being union-only coalitions really allows the unions and the coalition to focus on the unique challenges and opportunities that they face in dealing with climate change and this massive transition. I think the jobs and investment-led focus is really important. If you look at a lot of the proposals from the environmental movement, it's let's reduce emissions 45% below 1990 levels by 2040. Those types of recommendations. And we really focus on, how much do we need to build to meet our clean energy targets? How much is it going to cost? How many jobs are going to be created? What sort of skills and training are going to be needed to build those projects? And then what job training and quality standards need to be included to make sure that these are going to be high quality family and community sustaining jobs. And I think, as most trade unionists know, it's not just about brilliant ideas and reports and policies. They don't get the job done. You also actually have to build power and run campaigns to make sure the climate jobs recommendations are won and actually implemented. And we start seeing these new clean energy sectors get unionized and see significant union job creation as we build out this new clean energy sector. So that's the vision of the Climate Jobs National Resource Center and the work that we've been doing in about 10 states.
Lara, and you know what, I'm gonna take the interviewer's prerogative, and I'm gonna also include Bob in this question. So Lara and Bob, can you expand a little bit more? What is the role of research for the coalition, and why does research matter so much to the coalition? Because Bob, you're also playing a role in that part of it. So I'm going to ask both of you that question.
Yeah, maybe Bob, I can kick it off, and then you jump in. Yeah. So I would say, the research part is important. The policy research really helps the coalition identify, what their initial climate jobs recommendations are going to be. Typically recommendations for the building sector, the energy sector, transportation, around just transition. And then obviously there's ongoing, campaign policy and legislative research that helps the coalition run their campaigns to win the recommendations they've identified. We mentioned that, my institute, the Worker Institute at Cornell, ALEPI, and the University of Illinois Labor Program, we all work together to help identify the Climate Jobs Illinois potential climate jobs recommendations. And this research really includes a comprehensive scan of the state's, what we call climate, energy, labor, and employment profile. So, what are Illinois' total greenhouse gas emissions each year? What sectors produce those emissions? Is it the building sector? Is it energy, transportation, agriculture? In Illinois, it's your transportation sector that produces the most emissions. How have those emissions changed over time? Have they been increasing, leveling off, decreasing? What impacts are you all seeing from climate change already? What impacts can you expect to see, particularly if you continue business as usual? Where's your electricity come from? What sources produce your electricity? How much electricity do you need to produce, on average during peak periods? What needs to be done to reduce emissions in the state? What climate and energy programs already exist in Illinois, and how effective are they? Are they actually reducing emissions at the scale and pace that we need them to, according to climate science? Are they actually creating jobs, and are they high quality jobs, right? That's all part of the profile. And then the research, really helps us to design these policy recommendations. And, I sort of talk about it in terms of, the climate jobs recommendations need to hit the sweet spot of significant emissions reduction, right? We need to dramatically reduce emissions. They need to provide the greatest union job creation that we can get. So what strategies will get us that? And then how do they build more resilient and equitable communities? And so a lot of it is doing the sort of infrastructure and community investments that, that we've needed to do for a long time. And then, I would say what's really great about the research that we do is it's a really iterative process with folks like Pat and Sean and all of the other folks in the Illinois labor movement that we worked with, who are really experts in their industry. They're industry experts. They know their industries in and out and can really sort of give us a lot of, insight and guidance on what's happening on the ground and where we need to be doing more research to inform the process. So that's kind of the background on how we approach it and come to the recommendations. And then, Bob, you went deep on a couple of different areas. So, add to what I said.
Yeah. Well, no, wonderful answer, Lara. I would add, and it may seem obvious, but the research really helps to answer questions that are used to support the credibility of the recommendations. So we're using evidence, we're using data to drive evidence-based decision-making. The research is a way to pull away the ideology, to pull away the bias, to pull away the mischaracterizations, and to say, look, if you do good, solid analysis, if we bring the folks in from the Worker Institute, if we bring our partners from the Illinois Economic Policy Institute, if we utilize the skills that we have at the University of Illinois, we can help policymakers. We can give them greater assurances that if they do X, they're going to generate Y outcome. So I think it's absolutely critical. I don't want legislators making decisions on the future health of the state, let alone the planet and the labor market, if they're not going to look at some good hard data. I don't want their biases to get in the way, right? And as Lara notes, one of the areas that we took a deeper dive, and we hope to, and this will be a really good transition into our conversation about the pieces of the legislation. But we took a good hard look at schools. K through 12 schools, a clean school initiative. And this one is really built out. And so I'm kind of anxious to hear where it kind of fits in the legislation too, because it's probably where I put most of my energies into, but we're really proud of it. And we think there's enormous potential because it impacts children. And as we think about COVID and we think about air quality, wow, what a perfect time to do this upgrade. So for all those reasons, I'm glad we have this research support component. And I'm looking forward to hearing about the legislation.
So why don't we dive in? What are the specifics? And this question is for Pat and Sean. What are the particular pieces of the legislation that the coalition is going to be supporting?
Yeah, I can probably kick it off, and then Sean can add to it. He's been, like I said, working regularly in the development of these proposals. So yeah, we're in the process of putting together our comprehensive legislative package, and the initiative's really built around 7 main components. And this is a result, and Lara referred to it earlier, of those policy recommendations that our executive committee put out last fall. The first and one of our highest priorities, and I hope we can talk a little bit more specifically about it before the time runs out, is our nuclear piece. We have a proposal to make sure Illinois has the most robust nuclear fleet of any state in the country, clean energy generation, and we want to make sure that nuclear fleet is preserved. So right now there are closure announcements for a couple of plants that have a devastating impact to our state, workers, regions, and the economy, as well as our carbon-free goals that we're working towards as a state. So we have a proposal in on nuclear. The carbon-free school program that Bob mentioned, that's really our marquee proposal, something really innovative that we have not seen others make out there. And really, at the center of it is putting solar on top of public school buildings across the state and prioritizing Tier 1 and Title I schools. So we're making those investments in those poorest districts that also are disparately impacted by carbon emissions and other types of pollutants. We're proposing to put 2.5 gig plus of solar panels on these public schools, do energy efficiency audits, increase the energy efficiency of these buildings, and making sure that not only are we going to be producing carbon-free energy and additional renewables, but we're also going to be promoting cleaner classroom, better learning environments for our kids in the schoolroom. So that's something we're really excited about, and we're going to build out a robust campaign around that piece. We have a proposal on renewable energy credit reform and what they call the renewable portfolio standard budget, which is the dollars that the state is allocating through the from the ratepayers to be able to fund renewable energy credits for renewable developers. Currently, there are not labor standards in that process. There is not much effort or focus on equity provisions to make sure we're putting those projects in the right places in the state to change that disparate impact. Also, in terms of the workforce, another proposal we have is workforce development. We want to make sure we're investing in not only transitioning workers that are currently working in fossil plants that are in the future perhaps going to be transitioned as we build out a cleaner energy generation, to make sure that they are taken care of, but also recruiting minorities and making sure that this new energy workforce around building out renewable projects, we're recruiting and employing and training more of a diverse workforce to make sure we're impacting the equity that currently, hasn't really been addressed in previous legislation. We have a proposal on rate making. Currently, there's a rate making process that's set to expire in 2022, and that's what the utilities do to justify the rates that they're charging to consumers. We want to make sure that process is completely transparent, but also make sure that those utilities that employ thousands of our members are able to continue to invest in those capital projects around the state that put people to work in good paying union jobs. Our sixth piece is our transportation piece, and that's centered mostly around electric vehicles and beneficial electrification, building out the charging infrastructure that will make it possible to increase the number of electric vehicles on the road, with also a nod towards making sure we're protecting our public transit system that is really suffering right now, particularly with the effects of COVID. And last, but certainly not least, is the just transition piece, making sure, again, that those employees that are currently working in fossil plants and probably initially coal plants, as those plants, close, mostly because of just the term where coal is currently, and just in terms of the economics of it, that we're making sure that workforce is trained to transition into other types of good paying jobs, and hopefully many of them in the renewable energy development sector. And again, I want to stress this, the equity and labor standards provisions that we're promoting are going to be woven throughout that entire package, and emphasize anywhere that there is going to be a subsidy provided for a renewable energy developer, we want to make sure that they are paying close attention to making that process and training our workforce more equitable and with the labor standards that our members are going to insist on. So that's just a general kind of a thumbnail sketch as to what's going to be included within the legislation.
Real quick before we kick it back over to Sean. So first of all, I think what's clear to me is we're going to have more programs on this, because that was quite a list. And I feel like we could probably do an hour program on each one of those items. And I will also say, if folks have questions on Facebook, you could type them in. I think we've already gotten more questions in this forum than any other forum we've done. So this is a very timely topic. And we're going to have all of you back, and we're going to have to do this again. I wanted to mention that our host, Gus Wood, has joined us. Gus is a postdoctoral fellow at the Labor Education Program. He does a lot of work on race and working class movements in Atlanta and in the United States. So Gus will be adding his perspective and asking questions. And Bob, I wanted to see if you had any last words, because I know that you have another forum that you have to go be part of, because we love forums. And so I wanted to just check in with you before we go over to Sean.
Well, no, thanks. I actually feel kind of badly about leaving this forum, and I've been trying to figure out how to come late to the other one. But that would be rude to those folks. So you'll have to accept my apologies. Thank you all for being a part of it. I'm going to hang on for just a few more minutes. I'm really thrilled that we've got an audience that's asking lots of questions. So why don't we let Sean talk a bit about the legislation, and then we can turn to questions or give Gus a chance to comment. So thanks a lot, and we'll see you again down the road.
Yeah, and Sean, if you could, expand on what Kat said, and also if you could really also just hit home that last piece, because I think it's such an important piece. That last piece about what does a just transition look like, I think is really, really important. But if you could speak about the legislation and what you're working on.
Sure. Thank you. Well, first of all, this is an area of law that is very esoteric and jargon laden, and it has been a learning curve for all of us, and that just underscores the need that Lara and Bob and others have how important the role that they've played in the development of this proposal has been. But it is crucial that we maintain, as Pat said, our nuclear fleet, and at the same time continue down a path of developing additional renewable energy. Bob mentioned the Carbon-Free Schools Initiative. That is again our sort of highlighted marquee proposal that really sets our proposal apart from any of the others that have been put out there by environmental groups and renewable energy developers and other legislative interests. And one of the reasons it's such we feel such a great idea is that since Illinois ratepayers are investing in the development of renewable energy, why shouldn't we give those ratepayers the added benefit of having creating the potential for developing lower cost, if not free energy, essentially in the long run for to power their schools. And it's not simply just having solar panels on school roofs or on adjacent fields. It's also modernizing our school buildings so that when we have when we have schools and kids in classrooms in the middle of February when it's 4 degrees, we're not pumping as much heat out of the building envelope as we are trying to generate it inside. So we want to be able to make those buildings more energy efficient, which again is going to have a benefit for the school districts and the local taxpayers. And it also one of the reasons that some of our education union brothers and sisters are so interested in this proposal is because it also provides for some educational opportunities for our school kids so that they can see how these systems operate and what exactly is being done and a whole the curriculum can just build from there, and it's really one of, as I said, the marquee items that we have, but by no means the only important one that we have. As far as a just transition goes, that is it is for something that needs to be done when we have the several thousand workers who are in fossil fuel burning power plants right now, and whether it's their employers, the companies that own these plants are saying we're going to be closing these down in 2 or 5 years. What is going to happen to those workers who right now make a very good living? And then, what can they do if they are not at a point where they're going to be able to retire and enjoy the fruits of their labors over the previous decades? What are they going to do in order to maintain the standard of living that they've enjoyed working at these facilities, whether that means some assistance with wage assistance, transition assistance, or education, obviously would be a major component for a lot. Those are things that cannot be ignored and must be addressed in any kind of legislation that comes up, because whether some view this as a question of renewables versus fossil fuels, and while in many cases the fossil fuel industry is saying we would like to transition ourselves out of this sector, and so it is a critical thing for the workers who are engaged in that type of work, and it's something that, as I said, needs to be addressed in any policy, in any proposal that comes up before the legislature.
Great, thanks a lot. We appreciate that, and just in kind of digging into the coalition's agenda, and this is for all three of you, starting with Pat. What are the biggest challenges to implementing the coalition's agenda? Do you feel? Where do you see this? Where do you see this going, and what types of resources do you think are available to deal with those challenges as you see them coming up early?
Yeah, I think in the energy space, the strong presence of all the various stakeholders that are out there and the varying interests that each one of those groups brings to the table, I think is really the biggest challenge. I mean, proposals that are out there are going to be coming from labor with our perspective. We have the Clean Jobs Coalition just introduced last week. Their 900-page Clean Energy Jobs Act, or CEJA. We have the Path to 100, a group made up of some environmental interests, but I think heavily influenced by renewable energy developers, have a proposal. The utilities, ComEd, Exelon, Ameren, have their interests, that are going to be before the General Assembly are considered by them. And then you've got, of course, the legislative leaders, the chairs of the two committees in each chamber that deal with energy and environmental issues. And then the governor's office. Last but not least, they've had a working group that's been meeting for the last year and now have, subgroups, smaller groups that are working on more specific proposals. And each one of these groups comes with a different perspective, have different priorities based on the makeup of their own, affiliation or coalition. And so I think just getting to an agreement with all those, very, very different interests is going to be a challenge. Now, we have gone and made it a priority. We're meeting with each one of these groups to make sure we're finding as much alignment as we possibly can between our proposal, our policy objectives, and those. There's some areas that I think there's going to be good alignment between the various groups. There's others, and including, labor standards, that perhaps others aren't going to want to embrace, but it's going to be something that we're going to insist on as we move through the negotiations process through this first spring session of the 102nd General Assembly.
Another, if I may jump in,
Please.
Yeah, another one of the challenges that is going to be difficult is in addition to being a very complex topic, Illinois is a very diverse state. So you lay on top of all of those things that Pat just mentioned, and then you say, okay, what how do we incorporate what the needs of what the Chicagoland area has with what the needs of Central and Southern Illinois have. We've got two different regional transmission organizations. The northern third of the state is in one group. The southern 2/3 of Illinois are in a different group. Most of the coal-fired power plants are in the southern and central parts of the state. And how are we going to backfill the energy production that used to occur in those areas? And at the same, are we going to simply import power from another area, or are we going to develop our own power, which we have the resources to do in terms of the natural resources? And those are going to be balances that need to be made. Most of the people obviously in the state are in the northeastern portion, the nine counties around Chicagoland, and that's obviously where most of the money that's going to finance any kind of renewable development is going to come from, simply by virtue of the fact that the vast majority of our population comes from there. But we don't have the land in that area of the state to develop a wind farm or a large solar development. That's going to be obviously in more rural areas. So there are a lot of in addition to the players, it's also a question of the various geographic complexities and others other complexities overlaid on top of it that we have to deal with.
Thank you.
I would jump in too there. Is that okay, Stephanie? Yeah. I would just say, a few things in terms of challenges. We're up against the clock. I sort of laid out the scale and urgency of the climate crisis at the beginning, right? This is a massive transition. So we're facing that, right? Like this urgency around climate change. We've got to act really quickly to bring down emissions. That's tough. At the same time, although they still remain quite small, the clean energy sectors are growing quickly. The clean energy sector tends to be rebounding better from the COVID-19, economic crisis than other sectors. Job growth and solar and wind tend to be faster, or tend to be, moving at faster rates of growth than other sectors. But can we get in there early, like Pat and Sean are talking about, and make sure that these are going to be good jobs? I mean, part of the framing that Cornell has really come at this with is that we're facing two crises, right? The crisis of climate change and the crisis of inequality. And we're talking about inequality of, income, but also wealth and race and power and opportunity. And so we can't let this whole big clean energy economy be built out and it be based on low quality jobs, right? These need to be high quality, union jobs that are going to help deal with the crisis of inequality that we're facing. And, most studies estimate that about 25 million jobs, maybe more, 25 million jobs are going to be created between now and 2050 in the clean energy economy to deal with climate change. So that just gives you the sense of the number of jobs that we're talking about. And, whether these are low quality or high quality jobs, really could determine a lot of the future of this country, right? And how equitable of a country are we going to be? And then the last thing I would say, and just on a more sort of mundane level, is that the renewable energy and clean energy agencies and divisions and states that are, typically tasked with this work, they really see their job as reducing emissions, reducing pollution, and they don't see it as much about job creation and economic development. Like we faced this in New York. It was, building out the offshore wind industry. Well, what are the quality of those jobs going to be? Are we going to build out an industry that's based on high quality jobs or not? And are we really going to maximize the benefits? So are we actually going to do some of the manufacturing and assembly of offshore wind work in the region, in the US, where there's twice as many jobs? And I think this question comes up in Illinois too, right? You have an opportunity potentially around electric vehicle manufacturing. Will some of that manufacturing, right? It's going to be great for you to build out the electric vehicle charging infrastructure, but it'd also be even better if you're actually manufacturing some of those vehicles. And to hear the Biden administration talk about, hey, we may convert the whole federal vehicle fleet to electric and attach standards of Buy Clean, Buy American, where these vehicles will actually have to be built in the US. That's the type of thinking that you don't get sometimes out of these renewable energy and clean energy agencies. And I think the labor movement really brings that perspective and strength.
Lara, thank you so much. I think that we have at least one auto worker is watching on Facebook, I know. So I'm sure she appreciated that perspective. Lara, I'm gonna keep it with you, because one of the questions that we got, we're going to bring in some questions from Facebook. One of the questions we got from Facebook is Cornell hosting any sort of courses right now on labor and climate?
Yeah, that's a great question. I teach a class on work, labor, and the climate crisis. That's part of our sort of undergrad grad program every couple of years. And then a big part of the work that we do with the Climate Jobs National Resource Center, in addition to helping with background research and policy development around these climate jobs programs, we also are developing trainings for members, right? And we see this as a big part of the work. If we're actually going to run successful campaigns and win these recommendations, members have to be involved and engaged in the campaigns and in the work. And so in New York, I mentioned that we've done a lot of work around offshore wind. What we're doing now, so the state has committed to building 9 gigawatts of offshore wind, PLA, great. Turns out, even after those projects are approved, right, it's local communities on Long Island that have to approve that the cable is going to come on shore underneath the beach, that a substation is going to be built. And so it's imperative that union members in Long Island are showing up to hearings, are meeting with their legislators, are writing op-eds and saying, we see that offshore wind is going to be important to tackling the climate crisis, but also as a major jobs and economic development opportunity for Long Island. So we developed a 90-minute training on climate change, the basics of climate change, what is the climate crisis, how does it affect working people and the labor movement, and then what are the opportunities around offshore wind. And that's a training that we've been delivering in Long Island. And that's part of the partnership that we want to have with unions in other states, is to be providing training and education programs for members that really sort of are a complement to the climate jobs recommendations and campaigns that they're focused on. So I'm excited for us. We've been thinking about building out a member training on climate change and carbon-free schools because there's a number of states that are now thinking about running carbon-free school campaigns.
Yeah, the carbon-free school thing is really interesting to me, and especially I think, as Pat said, at this moment when we are seeing how much air quality and how much all of that matters in our schools, and just I think we're at this moment to really rethink school buildings, both in terms of promoting clean energy and how our schools give our kids good environments, right? That's the idea that schools can be contributors to a good environment and also provide good environment for the people learning there, I think is really powerful and just is it's an important thing at this moment. Another question that we got, and I think that this question maybe is for Sean and Lara. If you're watching the news right now and you're talking about climate change and jobs, the big thing that you see is the cancellation or the pausing of some of the pipeline projects. And what do you say, Sean, to laborers? And I know it might not be as much of an impact in our state, so this might be a question for both you and Lara. What do you say to laborers who are concerned about the impact of this transition on their work, right? What do you say to those folks that might be losing their jobs if those pipeline projects don't go forward?
Well, that is it's a very difficult conversation to have, quite frankly. Laborers and pipe fitters and other trades get a lot of work out of pipelines, and Keystone XL being what you're referring to, I think, is something that our organization has supported for some time. And we've taken, the laborers have taken sort of an all of the above approach. I know we're talking here mostly about renewable energy and clean energy, but we also need certain things to power our vehicles at this point in time, and until such a time as we have a significant amount of our fleet, whether personal, governmental, or commercial, powered by electricity, we're going to need fuel, the traditional fuel, and that's going to be something that's going to be a difficult conversation, as I said. We do a lot of work, as I mentioned, on wind farms throughout our Midwest region. We represent 10 states, including Nebraska and South Dakota. And we do a lot of wind development there. So hopefully with the president's commitment to creating good paying jobs, we will see more development of renewables by contractors who take the high road, as opposed to trying to drive down the cost by paying as little as possible to the workers who build their wind and solar projects. Hopefully, we'll be able to see something where our workers who make a good wage on those projects that were mentioned earlier can make a good wage building out the renewable infrastructure of this country.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Sean. What's interesting, and this is for the next question we got from Facebook, is something that's pretty important to me as well, and that the issue, the role of the community in building this type of power and being a part of these coalitions, what resources there are in the community, and how much of a role can everyday rank and file members play in being a part of this. So for both Sean and Pat, where do you see there being a role for rank and file union members or community members in any climate labor coalition? And do you see the possibility of building a Illinois-centric training on this for these types of coalitions across the state? is there a model that we could possibly look at in the future that you may see of community and union and rank and file union members being a part, wielding some type of significant role in the building of these coalitions?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm gonna start by talking about the role of like the community and organizations, and you mentioned like workforce development and training, because that's something that we've talked an incredible amount about as a coalition. So under our workforce development proposal, we propose using the Illinois workforce training model that was included in the capital bill that was passed in 2019, a $46 billion capital bill that provided funding for thousands of jobs, vertical and horizontal construction. There was 25 million allocated out of capital money to create an Illinois Works program that's currently being built and is about to be implemented, that would partner with community organizations, some faith-based, some otherwise community organizations that could help recruit, identify, and prepare a diverse workforce for careers in the trades. The deal was where we were going to identify and partner with pre-apprenticeship programs and community organizations, identify ideal candidates to receive training in our trade apprenticeship programs, prepare them to succeed in those programs, and then funnel them into apprenticeship opportunities to where they could not just have a job, like a renewable energy installation job for a few months, prepare them to have a career in whatever respective trade they were in. So I think community access and partnership with how we're going to identify and train our workforce is definitely included in our proposal. In regards to rank and file union participation, I mean, I think, preparing themselves and making sure that their union trades programs are preparing them to work in this industry makes a lot of sense. I mean, the opportunities that are going to exist, and opportunities unlike today because of the lack of labor standards, that are going to be good paying union jobs employing many of our trades members, I think it presents a real opportunity for our rank and file tradespeople to work in this renewable energy sector. So I think that's a couple different ways that we could partnership with both community groups as well as like engage our rank and file members.
Yeah, and another way in which our rank and file members, have already been involved is, not only being educated about the issues and the need for the development of these projects, but there's no question that our members need to be engaged and involved at the local level when there is a project in their community, because there is invariably going to be opposition to a wind farm, and perhaps more as solar becomes more of a developed resource here in Illinois, solar farms will become more of a flashpoint. But we have been engaged in support of wind projects predominantly over the last decade, going to county board meetings and going to zoning board meetings and showing our support for these projects, so that the decision makers at the local level can see that there are people in their community who would like to see this project move forward. In our case, that project would be, the reason for that support would be because we want to see the jobs created for those workers, people from the community working in the community on the renewable energy project in question. There's a lot of opposition in some areas of the state on wind farms. In some counties have gone so far as to essentially zone them out of existence. And if that is allowed to happen, there's not going to be many wind farms built around the state of Illinois. And as I said, solar, albeit not as much of a flashpoint at this point in time, I suspect that at some point in time there will be some organized opposition to those projects wherever they may be proposed. And as a result, we will need to have our members engaged and those of the other trades, in addition to other supporters, saying this is a good idea. This is something that's good for the community, and it's going to be good for working families in our area.
Oh yeah, there'll definitely be opposition to those things, definitely. So, and I'm sure that they're already thinking ahead of how they're going to present their opposition. But I definitely appreciate that from both of you, that we have a lot of great people in the comments for this event that are interested in those ideas about the training purposes, because again, those are the resources that we're going to need to not only deal with the issues of climate change and the renewable future, but also we want to make sure our neighborhoods and our public resources are strengthened and built alongside whatever we do within these types of what I call the new political economy. So we appreciate that.
Definitely. I wanted to say that we had the executive vice chair of the Heart of Illinois Sierra Club wanted to thank all of you for today's forum. One of the questions that she had is, what do you, and this is probably a question for Pat, what do you think of, or Pat and Sean, what do you think of the Clean Energy Jobs Act bill?
Yeah, so the CEJA that's commonly referred to is a proposal, a current legislative proposal that was created by the Clean Jobs Coalition. I don't know, Sean is on our government affairs committee. I'm going to ballpark it here. We've probably had, 16, 18 meetings with the Clean Jobs Coalition where we look at the various components of the legislative package that I described earlier. We lay it side by side to those similar components in CEJA and try to figure out exactly where there is alignment and where there is not. And I'm happy to say, in most of the areas, there is alignment. Because we're just now, CEJA's in some form or another been out there now for 3 years. So it's a fully developed legislative package, right? Because ours is newer, we're in the process of still finalizing our language around the general principles that our coalition supports. So this week, as a matter of fact, we're going to be doing some extensive internal review of our language, and then we'll go back again with CEJA. I believe we already have some dates on our calendar for next week and the following. And again, try to continue to develop alignment between our proposals and theirs. I'm sure in many areas there's probably a couple where we're going to have some disagreements, and it'll probably have to be resolved through the legislative process and figuring out where the various legislators who are going to lead those negotiations would like to land at the end of the day. But yeah, we have a very good, positive working relationship with the Clean Jobs Coalition and CEJA.
Great. Well, listen, we've almost been going at this for an hour and a half, and that's what I told you. So I will say there's been a lot of comments, just to give you some things that, just to mention some things that folks have said is one, and I think that this really especially will speak to Sean, is using the community colleges that we have and the relationships with them and their workforce development and how important that will be. And we have such a good model with that, with the laborers and the Department of Labor pre-apprenticeship training program, and thinking about how we can continue to build and leverage this model. We've also had multiple questions or multiple comments on really making sure that we get central labor committees involved and involved in supporting the legislation. And mobilizing local members. And we've had a few questions on, how do we have conversations with municipalities and getting them, and are there any model bills, or model bills might not be the right word, but model, resolutions or that we could be helping get into the hands of municipalities. And I'd like to talk about all of those. And I'd like to talk more about Pat's 7 points and a lot of the stuff that Lara brought up. And so I guess I'm going to end it with two questions. One, could you just give us your final thoughts? And two, can we get you all to commit to come back so that we can continue this conversation again? Because I almost feel like we've just scratched the surface. A lot of the conversation that we have had has generated a lot of questions, and for me too. I usually get to ask at least a few questions that I want to, but we had so many from the comments that I didn't get that chance. So those are what are your final thoughts? And would you come back if we did this again? Why don't we go Lara and then go to Sean, and we'll end with Pat.
Well, I'll start with your second question first, Stephanie. Be happy to come back. This was a really fun discussion. Thanks to you all for organizing it and hosting it. It's been fun. And then in terms of closing remarks, I mean, I would just say, you know, I've had the, you know, opportunity to work with Pat and Sean and a bunch of other folks in Illinois. And it's been a lot of fun, but, you know, sitting here this afternoon, it's just like so exciting to hear about how Climate Jobs Illinois is taking off. And how, you know, well the work is going. I think, you know, and that really speaks a lot to Pat's leadership and Tim and Ralph and Bob's leadership on this project. But I mean, they have, you know, this really clear agenda now for how to tackle the climate crisis and build out a clean energy economy, but do it in a way that actually is going to create union jobs and to support, you know, workers and communities and frontline communities in this, you know, really big transition. And it's just really exciting to see how they've, you know, dug into this work and started moving it forward. And I'm excited to keep watching it. And then I would say just one other thing on that, 3 other states right now, New York, Connecticut, and Maine, are also introducing clean energy legislation in this current legislative session that will ensure prevailing wage, project labor agreements, labor peace and neutrality, community workforce agreements, some aspects of, you know, using DOL certified apprentices. So it's just super exciting to see that there's now, you know, several states where we're really getting focused on this. How are we going to make sure that this new clean energy economy is going to be equitable, that it's going to create union jobs? And the Climate Jobs National Resource Center just held its first multi-state convening a few weeks ago. Pat participated in it. And again, that was just really fun to bring together all of the great labor leaders who are working on climate jobs programs in different states. And, you know, just have the opportunity to share experiences, share strategy, and learn from each other. And I just think, you know, it's just obvious that, you know, this clean energy economy is going to move forward. We're going to build a lot of this stuff. It's going to be a big part of our economy moving forward. But is it going to tackle inequality? Is it going to, you know, create high quality union jobs? That's the question. And I think labor being involved and, you know, having its voice and power in these discussions and in this movement is so important. So thanks for hosting this conversation.
Yeah, I too would jump at the chance of participating in another event like this. As far as you know, parting observations, this is going to be a very difficult piece of legislation, whatever it may look like at the in the final analysis, is going to be a very difficult piece of legislation to move. Invariably, some group or 10 are going to be unhappy with the final product, and you know, it's common in the legislature to say, if no one's happy, you must have a good compromise. That's not always the case, but it's going to be something that's going to be difficult to move. There are going to be, you know, in large part because there are jobs on the line, as discussed, but then also there are people's monthly budgets are on the line as well, because we cannot develop our renewable resources to the extent that we would need to, as Lara pointed out at the outset, without significant investment. And investment requires money, and money is going to be coming from you and I and other people who have electric bills to pay every month. And that's not an easy decision to make for policymakers. You know, how fast can we do it? How much money is going to be available to try to meet the renewable needs of Illinois, and that's going to be a push and pull situation, and obviously we've set out a very aggressive standards, very aggressive timelines for the development of those renewables, and we would like to see see Illinois come as close to meeting those measuring sticks as possible. And it's not going to be easy, as I said, and it'll be interesting to see. But we're ready to go and prepared to talk to our legislators about what needs to be done, and work with groups like the environmental groups and others to try to get it done.
Yeah. So Stephanie, first of all, yeah, I'd be happy to participate in another offering of this subject, and I've really enjoyed this discussion. I can't really improve upon Lara and Sean's closing remarks, but I will say this, in that I'm really proud of the work that we've done in Illinois, and thankful to, Lara's leadership and others who had a, vision, much broader vision than we understood in Illinois a year ago of what labor could do around the energy space. But to start with, by having a really hard conversation with our affiliates about, some work that's not going to exist, that are currently providing, great paying jobs in the future, understanding that reality and those things are going to happen with or without us. And instead of choosing, as we've done in the past on various subjects, of being more reactive, of creating a proactive proposal and really putting our marker down on behalf of our members to make sure in this space that's going to provide millions of new opportunities in the future across the nation. In Illinois, we're already the leader in terms of labor standards and requirements in the country, but making sure in this new renewable energy space and the way we're transitioning our economy and energy generation, that Illinois workers are going to again be at the forefront in regards to their ability to take care of their families, save for college, buy the things that they need, and sustain that middle class that we've worked so hard to build up. I'm really proud that this coalition has done the incredibly hard work to put us in the place that we're in right now. And Sean's absolutely 100% correct. Any one of those 7 components individually is a really big lift to try to get something passed in the General Assembly and signed by the governor. This comprehensive package is tough, but it's something where I think it's going to be beneficial, not only, like Sean said, to our members certainly, but to ratepayers and to all the people that are impacted by energy generation and the distribution of energy in our state. So again, thank you guys very much. I appreciate this opportunity.
I think that with these kinds of events that we have, and we're just really so honored that all 3 of you were here for this, and it's no wonder why it'll probably be the most requested that we do this part 2 as soon as possible. Is I think that all 3 of you touched on something really important in your final comments, is the question of what's going to happen to the people that are mostly affected by this. I mean, it's no secret that what's going on now in terms of our political economy is one of the most kind of devastating times that we've had in a long time. There are a lot of jobs that have disappeared since the 2008 recession. The ones that are livable wage, union-based, are disappearing rapidly. There's been a rise in more underemployment type jobs, and the training resources that typically have always been in spaces like this in the 60s, 70s, and 80s are more rapidly disappearing. And so what I see that you all provide and what our listeners can take away from this is that the renewable future that hasn't really begun to take off yet, there can be a foundational piece that protects the working classes to be a part of this new future. So you're actually going to create something based in a strengthening of a group that has had so many things taken from them resource-wise for so long, that this can really be that launching pad to, a lot of people talk about saving the middle class, but the working classes right now are in such dire straits that this will be their launching pad with this type of platform, with these coalitions. And so I see a lot of great future endeavors with this model, as long as the 3 of you have said repeatedly throughout this event, that the people on the ground, the rank and file people, are at the center of helping create that destiny, that vision for this renewable future. And I think that we're all going to be successful if that occurs. And so I'm really excited about these models and exactly what we can talk more about and digging deeper, as Stephanie has talked about. And so again, we just want to thank you all for really bringing this home and shedding a light on a part of labor that we often don't hear talked about ever. And I think that this is something that serves a lot of potential for building a new future for the working classes. So Stephanie, let's take us out.
No, I can't take it out better than that. I mean, we titled this thing, this panel, Building a Renewable Future. And it's not just, as Gus said, it's not just a renewable future for our planet and for our state and for our climate, which is essential, but it's also very much a renewable future for work and working people. And that those two goals are only going to be accomplished if we could accomplish them together. And this legislation that you're working on is so crucial. Lara, the work that you're doing and the training that you're doing and the research you're doing is essential. Pat and Sean, thank you so much for being visionary leaders on this and bringing people to the table. This is exciting. And look, we got to keep having this conversation. I'm really glad that the U of I could be a part of this conversation today. And we look forward to continuing it. And to our panelists, thank you. This is by far the most Facebook questions and comments that we've gotten. And I think it speaks to how essential this conversation is right now. And thank you for spending your part of your Sunday with us.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.